Hey there, everyone, and welcome to Pour and Explore, a wine, food, and travel podcast. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, the wine guy. I'd love to be your go-to guide for all things wine, food, and the amazing places they take us. Here on Pour and Explore, we'll sip, savor, and wander through the exciting world of wine, discuss incredible cuisines, and uncover the stories behind unforgettable destinations. Each week, I'll bring you lively conversations with wine experts, chefs, travel pros, and fellow enthusiasts. We'll share practical tips, hilarious tales, and plenty of inspiration to fuel your next adventure. So grab a glass, pull up a chair, and join me as we pour, explore, and celebrate the good life. Let's dive in. Hello there, wine lovers. Welcome back to Pour and Explore, a wine, food, and travel podcast. I'm your host, Nick Elliott, certified sommelier, former winemaker, and your personal guide to making wine fun, approachable, and most importantly, delicious. Today, we're diving into a category of wine that doesn't always get in the spotlight, but absolutely should. Today, we are talking about dessert wine. That is right, dessert wine. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, aren't dessert wines just super sweet and heavy, overwhelming, just syrupy, and so on? Well, yes and no. The best dessert wines aren't just about sugar. They're about balance. They are about complexity. They're about versatility. And most importantly, they are absolutely scrumptious. Today, we're going to explore some of the more famous styles of dessert wine. Some you may have heard of, some you may not have heard of, but they are all absolutely worth a try. They are all absolutely worth seeking out and trying next time you're at a restaurant, going and buy a bottle at your favorite wine shop, and absolutely worth tasting 100%. So I definitely want to get into it right now. We're going to talk a little bit about Sauternes. We're going to talk a little bit about Eiswein. We're going to talk about some other dessert wines like Tokaji, Pedro Jimenez, and much, much more. So, my hope is by the end of this episode that you'll be able to know what makes dessert wines so special. Of course, how they're made, because I don't like talking about enjoying wine without knowing about how it's made. So, you're going to hear that from me. We're going to talk about some killer food pairings to go along with these dessert wines, and no, they are not all desserts to go along with your dessert wine, and some things, some pairings that you've probably never considered. So, with that being said, grab a glass, whether that be sweet or dry, and let's get started. So, what exactly is a dessert wine? Simply put, a dessert wine is any wine that has a higher level of residual sugar. In the wine industry, residual sugar, or we shorten it to RS, a lot of times when we're talking about the sugar content in wine. So, residual sugar can be very, very low in wine. Most table wines that we enjoy out there are very, very dry, so have very, very little or no sugar content in them, all the way up to lots of sugar. And I'm not going to go into, the numbers and the amounts and so on, how I don't like to geek out on you too much. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But here's the thing, great dessert wines aren't just about sugar. Again, we talked about balance. We talked about the complexity. So what we're looking for in addition to that sugar is a nice acidic balance that keeps the wine from being too overwhelming in one way or the other. Balance in wine is so important. Think about it on the opposite spectrum. If you got a glass of table wine that was just a huge acid bomb, and you put it in your mouth, and it was so tart, and it was so biting, and it was so astringent, you're probably not going to enjoy it. And I would say for the most part, depending on who you are, of course. The same would go for a dessert wine that is all sugar, all flab, and no brightness in there at all. The best dessert wines, they are a beautiful dance between sweetness and freshness. You're creating something that's rich, something that has layers to it, and something that is totally unforgettable. So let's start with one of the most famous dessert wines, and dare I say, one of the most luxurious dessert wines out there. And we are, of course, talking about Sauterne. Sauterne is, sorry, Spain. Sorry, Italy. Sorry, Canada. Sauterne really is the king of sweet wines, if you ask me. But then, of course, I am partial to French wine, but that is besides the point. Sauterne is a rock star, and if you haven't tried it yet, you definitely want to put Sauterne on your bucket list. Let's talk about what makes Sauterne so special. Well, first and foremost, the region that Sauterne comes from, and you've heard me talk about this a lot on this show, is in France. They have very specific styles, very specific ways of doing things in their winemaking in France. So you're only going to find real Sauterne that is made in the Bordeaux region of France, which is on the west coast of France, river valleys, beautiful rolling hills, famous, of course, their famous still wines, your Red Bordeaux or your Bordeaux Rouge, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Malbec, Cab Franc, just beautiful wines. And then on the white side, Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc are the white wines that are primarily the ingredients in a white Bordeaux or a Bordeaux Blanc. So in Semillon, they are going to use those same grapes for their Sauternes. So Semillon, Sauvignon Blanc, and then oftentimes they'll use another variety of grape called Muscadel, and that will sometimes, but not all the time, be blended into the Sauterne. The secret ingredient, besides grapes, in Sauterne is something that is called noble rot. You heard me correctly. Noble rot, R-O-T. And noble rot is also known as botrytis. Sounds gross, right? But actually, it's a magical fungus that grows on the grapes as they start to die towards the end of the growing season. And what's happening is that noble rot, it is shriveling the grapes, it's concentrating the sugar content, and then it is also adding flavors of, believe it or not, honey, some baking spice notes, really, really gorgeous. Nutty is another one, floral characteristics. So we're taking something that, on face value, this noble rot, this botrytis, and it sounds very off-putting, but the French have learned to capture the beautiful notes that are happening while the grapes are rotting on the vine, capturing that lightning in the bottle, crushing it, fermenting it, doing all of the things that they need to do to it to turn it into wine, and then rebottling that as this golden, luscious, creamy, viscous, lusciously sweet wine. And you're going to get beautiful flavors of apricot, orange marmalade. I mentioned baking spices earlier. It's a super fun wine, and it's one that you absolutely have to try if you like your wine a little bit sweet. You know what? And if you don't like your wine a little bit sweet, you should try it anyway. It's an experience. Trust me, it's something that you're definitely going to want to add to your list. Let's talk for a minute about pairing Sauterne with food. I just had a lovely conversation with a fellow wine lover, and we talked a little bit about pairing wine with cheese, and in particular, pairing dessert wine with cheese. So the first thing that comes up for me is pairing Sauterne with blue cheese. Now, this is a match that absolutely works so wonderfully. If you think about blue cheese, it's got a little bit of acid, a little bit of astringency, very salty. It can be creamy, depending on the level of blue in there. It can have all different types of characteristics, but let's just use regular old blue cheese that you get at the supermarket as the example. The saltiness of that cheese is going to cut through the sweetness of the Sauterne, and it's just going to be a beautiful match. And vice versa, the sweetness of the wine is going to downplay the sodium content of that cheese. Now, the next pairing I'll talk about, some of you may love it, some of you may hate it, some of you may be against it. Wherever you sit, pairing Sauterne with a well-cooked foie gras is, again, just a stunning pair and one that you absolutely have to try. Foie gras, of course, being goose liver, it's rich, it's buttery, it's creamy, and when it's cooked well, you're going to have a little smokiness from the pan searing, and so on. And it's also going to be slightly sweet. Goose liver foie gras is also very slightly sweet. So you're taking something that has some sweetness in it, and you're adding some additional sweetness on top of it, plus all of those other layers of stone fruit and sweet. Just absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous pairing. Now, here's one for you that might throw you off a little bit. Sauterne and fried chicken. You heard that right. Sauterne and fried chicken. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about Colonel Sanders over here. I would always prefer you to cook at home if you can, or go to a nice restaurant and, get yourself a good piece of fried chicken. And if they have Sauterne on the menu, it is absolutely worth a try. I should say, while we're on the subject of ordering dessert wine at a restaurant, oftentimes a pour of dessert wine, I would say 9 times out of 10, a pour of dessert wine, whether we're talking about Sauterne or Port or Madeira or Tokaji, is always going to be shorter. It's going to be a shorter pour, 3 to 4 ounces, maybe something along those lines. It's really something that's made to sip, to savor. If you're a bourbon drinker, just imagine having a really beautiful bourbon. You try it neat, you put a little bit in your glass, a couple of fingers in your glass, as we say, and just sip on it. Or if you enjoy tequila and añejo, that's another great example of just, taking little sips here and enjoying all of the complexity and the beauty of that wine. So, let's go back to what I was actually talking about here a second ago, and talking about fried chicken and Sauterne. Sweet, savory, salty. It is a chef's kiss, 100%. Now, you might be asking, hey, Nick, what are some of the more famous Sauternes out there? What can I go get my hands on? Well, the most famous Sauterne producer, I would say producer in the world, is a winery that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, going back, I believe, to the 12th century or something like that. It's called Chateau Yquem. That's Chateau d'Y, Quem, Chateau Yquem. But wines that you're buying from Chateau Yquem are also going to be typically half bottles, so 375 milliliters, and those bottles can go for hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars for just a small bottle of this wine. That's how sought after they are. That's how amazing they are. They do pull those prices. But don't worry, there are plenty of more affordable Sauternes out there on the list. Go get yourself a half bottle. You might be paying for a good Sauterne, you might be paying in the range of $50 to $75 for a half bottle. But it is an experience, and the wine guy is all about experiences. So please go out and try that. All right, let's move on to another wine that does not get enough attention, in my opinion, and we are talking about Eiswein. Eiswein is a dessert wine that is literally made from frozen grapes. That's why we call it Eiswein or Eiswein. as they call it in Germany, is made by allowing the grapes on the vine as we get deeper into the winter to naturally freeze on the wine. And what's going to happen during that process is the water inside the grape freezes, the sugars and the flavors will remain concentrated. So when these grapes are then pressed while they're still frozen, you get a juice that is going to be just incredibly rich and sweet and bursting with fruit flavors. Absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Again, another wine that's going to be very thick and viscous and just coat your palate when you're drinking it. It's really, really a lot of fun. Where is ice wine made, you might ask? Well, it's certainly not made in the north of Argentina. It's not going to be made in Spain. Where ice wine is made is places like Canada, for example. Canada, the northern United States, up by the Finger Lakes in New York. These are two places, Ontario specifically, in Canada, are very, very popular ice wine producing regions. Germany is where ice wine was invented hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, who knows? And ice wine is a tradition in Germany, and it's always going to be absolutely beautiful, not always sickeningly sweet. I probably shouldn't have used that word, overly sweet, but you're going to have a beautiful amount of sweetness. And then, of course, looking at Northern Europe, Austria is another place that you're going to find ice wines, really good ice wines being made. So what does it taste like? Well, ice wine, again, you're going to get some honey notes, stone fruit, again, specifically peaches. You might even get some tropical notes from the wine, maybe even some banana or pineapple, overripe pineapple. Really, really good. And flavors of caramel. As well coming, and that's all going to be wrapped up with some nice bright acidity. Again, just like Sauternes, ice wine is not a one-trick pony. It's got to have that beautiful balance between sweet and acid. It's rich, and I said earlier you're going to get this viscousness. It's going to be less so than Sauternes, but it's still going to be heavier than a still wine, if that makes sense. And the acidity is going to keep it nice and fresh. I highly recommend going out and trying some ice wine. They produce some really, really beautiful things. You're going to find some beautiful products. Again, Germany, Ontario, specifically in Canada, northern New York here in the States, producing some fun ice wines as well, and Austria. Go find yourself a bottle of ice wine. And again, much like Sauternes, they typically come in half bottles. You can find them in 750 milliliter bottles, but you're typically going to find them in half bottles. Talking about pairings, some fun things to do with ice wine, fruit tarts of all kinds, pear, peach, apple, of course, are going to be great. Cheesecake, a New York style cheesecake with that kind of salty, savory characteristic to it is going to go amazingly with ice wine. Spicy foods, I love pairing sweet and spicy. So when it comes to Thai or maybe an Indian curry dish, something off dry or even with a good amount of sweetness like an ice wine is going to be a lot of fun to try. And I probably should have said it at the beginning, ice wines are typically made from white grapes. So that's where this curveball comes in. Dark chocolate and ice wine is a fun little combination to try. And because the chocolate's not going to be, you're going to go with a high cacao percentage, 75 plus with your chocolate. And so it's not so sweet. Adding that with the sweetness and the beautiful fruit flavors of the wine is going to be a fantastic combination to go with your dark chocolate. If you're new to dessert wines, maybe skip over Sauterne for right now because you are going to be paying a premium for Sauterne. Find yourself a bottle of Eiswein. This is going to be a great entry point for you. It's fruity, it's fresh, it's super approachable, and as far as the price point goes, it's a lot friendlier on your pocketbook than the previous example. Okay. Well, we've got a few more things to talk about. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but these are wines that are absolutely worth mentioning when it comes to dessert wines. And the first thing we are going to talk about is a wine that is called Tokai. That is spelled Tokaj. And Tokai hails from Hungary, the great country of Hungary in Europe, part of the European Union, and they call Tokai the wine of kings. And it's really this beautiful, layered flavor profile, very similar to Sauterne. Tokai is made from a white grape called Ferment. And ferment grapes produce a similar style to Sauterne, but you're going to get a lot more spice notes to it. And by spice, I mean, think nutmeg, cinnamon, that baking spices is more what I'm talking about here. And you're going to get more dried fruit flavor. So instead of a fresh apricot, for example, you're going to get more of those dried apricot flavor profiles. Heading from Hungary, we're going to move over to Spain now, and there is a beautiful wine, dessert wine called sherry. Sherry is made a lot of times from a grape called Pedro Jimenez, and in PX sherry from Spain, Pedro Jimenez is a red grape, and you're going to have a much more dark, syrupy, raisiny, caramel, molasses flavor profile. It's like there's some nuttiness there. It's almost like drinking liquid pecan pie, if you will. It's just a beautiful, beautiful thing, and I would highly, highly recommend getting your hands on some of that if that sounds good to you. Moving down to Italy, Vinsanto is a Tuscan dessert wine made from dried grapes. What they'll do is they'll actually dry the grapes out and then extracting what little water and juice is left in those grapes. And again, dried apricots, nuts, spice, these are all things that you're going to find in a beautiful Vinsanto coming from Italy, and really, really good stuff. And then a category that spans a lot of different spectrums, spans a lot of different regions around the world. Most regions around the world have the ability to, they don't always, but have the ability to create what are just called late harvest wines. And late harvest wines are essentially wine grapes that have been allowed to sit on the vine for an extended period of time. The water content goes down, the sugar content goes up through the roof, the acid content goes down, and again, the sugar content goes through the roof. So what you're doing is you're picking those grapes much later in the harvest season, and the sugar content is going to be much higher than they were a month before or 2 months before during the ripening process. And allowing those grapes to naturally sweeten on the vine is going to give you a nice higher sugar content in the finished wines. And you're going to find late harvest wines in both red and white varieties. Rieslings, of course, Gewürztraminers. Zinfandel is a popular late harvest grape here in California, especially. So something that you absolutely want to try if you like those sweeter wines. Now, each one of these wines does bring something unique to the table, and you would really be remiss if you don't go out and try them all. Everything past the Sauterne, you can find them at very reasonable prices at really good wine shops online as well. But, if you have a couple extra bucks to spend, go and get yourself a bottle of Sauternes. You will not be disappointed, I can promise you. Let's talk about how to enjoy a dessert wine like a pro here for a second. Coming from a somm, putting the you drink what you like thing aside for a second, as I do in most of my episodes. That's my motto: you drink what you like, when you like, how you like, and so on. But if you really want to do it right, if you really want to be a dessert wine boss, this is what you could do, not necessarily what you should do. First and foremost, serving temperature. Dessert wines do best when they are chilled. I am not talking about, being placed in a bucket of ice for hours. I'm talking about, 45 to 50 degrees. If you're using Celsius, that's 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. That is an ideal temperature contrast. Glassware, you can skip those tiny dessert wine glasses. A regular white wine glass will do just fine. And actually, it might even increase your enjoyment of the wine because when you put wine in a glass, what is happening is the amount of contact that the wine has with the air around it. So the more surface area that the wine has to breathe and allow the aromas to come out of it, the better, in my opinion, and most somms' opinions. That's why if you think about, Pinot Noir glasses versus white wine glasses, Pinot glasses are big bowls, because their aroma profiles are going to be less in a Pinot Noir versus a Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. And similar for dessert wines. Dessert wines are very fragrant, very over the top on the nose, those aromas of dried fruit or baking spices or bananas or whatever you're getting, from that wine is going to do better if you put it in a larger glass. So, of course, you can drink your dessert wine out of a smaller glass, but I would recommend trying it out of a larger glass. Pour size, I mentioned it earlier, pour size on dessert wines, because they are so rich and so concentrated, a little pour, 2, 3, 4, 5 ounces at most is going to be plenty for your dessert wine. So another pro tip for you there. And lastly is don't just save your dessert wine for dessert. Try pairing your sweet wine with something savory. Start with your Vincento and a little cheese, maybe a brie or, a nice lighter cheese. If you're going for that Pedro Jimenez, maybe something with a little more backbone to it, like we talked about, blue cheese would be another great option for that. Maybe a Manchego from Spain, a Spanish wine with a Spanish cheese would be, again, very, very good. So, with that being said, we're going to start wrapping things up here. Wine lovers, I really appreciate you being here today on this episode. I hope you really enjoyed what you heard. Of course, as always, if you have any questions about what I talked about here today, you can always reach out to me. cheers@thewineguy.vin, V-I-N, is my email address. Check me out on social media. You're going to find this episode and many others available on, of course, YouTube. You'll find clips on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. As we covered all of these things, Sauternes, Eiswein, and these other amazing dessert wines, always feel free to reach out and ask me questions, whether that be on social media or on email. And please, if you like this episode, if you like what I'm doing here on Pour and Explore, please it's going to mean really a lot to me to do that. Please follow me as well. That's really, really going to help me out a lot. I would very, very much appreciate it. So I want to hear from you, is what I'm saying. If you have ever tried a dessert wine, which one is your favorite? Shoot me a message, tag me in your posts when you're out there and about enjoying a dessert wine. I am available on all of the big platforms, so please tag me, and I'd love to hear your questions. Again, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow wine lover. And of course, until next time, everybody, please remember to keep wondering and wandering. Cheers and have an awesome day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Pour and Explore. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your stories, and your questions, so you can drop me a line at cheers@thewineguy.vin. That's cheers@thewineguy.vin. Or let's connect on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook. Grab those links on my website at thewineguy.vin. Until next time, let's keep wondering and wandering. Cheers, everyone.